So you think you know the signs of drug abuse? Well, we'll see. During the next hour, we'll hear about the latest drug trends, see how to identify users, and know what innocent-looking items may signal drug use. Join us. It's all about knowing the signs, being able to recognize and identify drugs.
America is at a crossroads in the fight against illegal drugs, forging a path to keep law enforcement officers one step ahead of the bad guys. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, in partnership with the Multi-Jurisdictional Counter-Drug Task Force Training Program at St. Petersburg College, brings you the latest in counter-drug training.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Stan Rhodes. Joining me today is Bruce Ashley, a nationally recognized expert in the field of club drugs and narcotics investigations. Lieutenant Terry Duquino, a drug recognition expert with the Pinellas County, Florida Sheriff's Office. And Rita Newman, Laboratory Director for the Forensic Lab in Pinellas County, Florida. Welcome to the three of you. Appreciate you being here. And we're breaking today's broadcast down by drug group. There are 7 in all. I'm talking about each one. Rita can tell us about what each drug type does to the body. Terry's expertise is identifying offenders and users. And Bruce knows the paraphernalia. So let's jump right in. We have a lot to talk about, and we're going to start with depressants. Why do you three think this is the place to start?
It's actually a good place as any to start. Depressants are one of the most abused classes of drugs. It's also a class of drugs that's abused with other classes of drugs. And it's certainly one of the, in terms of pharmaceutical diversion, one of the biggest problems we have in this country.
And Terry?
Well, when you look at the offender types, these are ordinary, everyday people. But unfortunately, they ingest these illegal substances, and they go to work, they drive their vehicles, or they're with their families, and you're going to really notice some very distinguishable differences in their behavior patterns. And that's the reason why we have the Drug Recognition Expert Program, and we have more education to our law enforcement personnel as well as folks in the workplace so they can understand these behavioral differences. And unfortunately, at times, we have to enforce those differences either by the laws that we have.
Right. And Bruce, your point of view on this?
I think it's very important for people to understand this is a growing area. Some areas of drug abuse have leveled off, but the depressant area being a pill-dominated area, it has opened up a whole new area of paraphernalia and manners of carrying and using these drugs, and it's a spiraling upward trend of abuse using depressants.
What kind of drugs are we talking about? What kind of pills? When we think of depressants, what are we talking about?
We're generally talking about, for the most part, prescription drugs. Now, keep in mind, alcohol is a depressant. It's the most abused drug, obviously. But for the most part, we're talking about tranquilizers, Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, things that are prescribed for anxiety, things that are prescribed for sleep, things that are prescribed to slow people down. Also in this class is GHB, which of course is a little bit more scary drug, not a prescription drug, a clandestine drug, but all have those same type of effects.
And what are they actually doing to the body? What are you seeing when people are abusing this?
And what Rita said is absolutely correct. And you know what? When these folks are taking these prescription drugs, that's when they're going to work. They're saying, well, I'm going to feel a lot better, and maybe I'm going to even feel better by taking a couple or 3 or 4 that's not going by what's actually prescribed. And then the impairment comes in, and they're wondering why they're driving into our crossing guard areas and almost hitting our children, to actually get on our roadways and causing crashes. And that's what we see. And unfortunately, we have to deal with the aftermath. And then when you stop them, you know, they said, well, my doctor gave me these prescription drugs and it's okay. And unfortunately, when it comes to the GHB, as Rita spoke about, now that's something that you don't even need a lot of. I mean, you're talking about a teardrop of anything, and they ingest that. And it's such a heavy anesthetic type of drug that when these
so
folks...
what are the effects with this?
Oh, my goodness. You know, when you stop a vehicle, and if I can digress for just a moment, usually, you know, somebody's going to be able to have good dexterity, give you their driver's license, registration, insurance card without any other problem.
Respond to what questions you've asked.
Exactly. And when you're dealing with an alcohol-based DUI, you know, everybody says, well, I have the aromas. But when you're dealing with some of these depressants, and we'll throw narcotics in there too, and I know we'll talk about that in a little bit, these polydrugs, you're going to see some noticeable differences. They're very lethargic, the drowsiness. You know, when you're looking at soma, That's another very popular drug too, and people are taking it for back pain, and everybody has back problems. And you're looking at people taking in 350 milligram doses, and they say, well, if that's not going to cut it, they'll take more. And they're so drowsy, lethargic, they're fumbling around, and you have a law enforcement officer out there saying, my gosh, I don't smell the alcoholic beverage, but there's something about this individual. They have very dilated pupils, and you're looking at some flaccidity at times when it comes to their skin, and there's other characteristics, and we're keen to look at those characteristics and act upon it too.
And so you're out there in the field, and you have to try and recognize and make all of these decisions as to what it is, what it isn't.
Correct. And that's the reason why with the Drug Evaluation Classification Program, we do have drug recognition experts across the country. And that's a program that was actually instituted from the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, because we got to look at that. When Rita talks about the numbers and the lab results and what she gets to her office, just in our county alone, it's significant. And the problem is significant too, and people just don't realize what it does to them because they think it's perfectly fine because it's a prescription. But what we find is they're so overly medicated, and it could be self-induced too, and then we have to deal with the aftermath of that.
Bruce, what are some of the things you see with this, with the abuse of depressants?
Well, Terry's point she just made is that there is a perception of quality, if you will, when it is a pill or in a pill form. Everybody metabolizes these drugs differently when they take them, and if they abuse them. We see young people on elementary and junior high school campuses selling the Ritalin that was prescribed to them or their parent. And so we see a lot of young people basically getting induced into trying something because it's in that pill form, and they've come to
There's a safety with it, they believe.
They've come to believe there's a quality of assurance with that, or it won't harm them because it is a pill, and therefore it is a prescribed medication that must be okay or safe to take.
Why does GHB fit into this category?
Well, because it's depressant, because it has intoxicating effects. As Terry said, it's a very dangerous drug because it takes a very small amount to have the effects. It takes a very small amount to go from intoxication to coma, and a small jump from coma to death. And it's a drug that's very hard to dose because a normal dose of GHB, which may give the intoxicating effects, you add one beer to that and now it's a fatal drug. Or you take GHB, you dose yourself normally, and next time you take it you don't eat anything.
Right.
The absence of that food now makes that a fatal drug as opposed to an intoxicating drug. So GHB is a very scary drug from that standpoint. It's also very commonly associated with what we used to call date rape. We now call it drug-facilitated rape, in that you can easily give it to somebody in a drink. It has no flavor. It has no odor.
So how are they administering it? Is it in a drop form that they can put into a liquid? Or?
Right. We find it most commonly submitted in water bottles. So they'll dilute it in water. You can dilute it in almost any drink, Gatorade, sodas, but most commonly we see it in just your average everyday beverage containers.
I do know that we have a particular video regarding this, and it has to do with a traffic stop involving someone who was on GHB, and we're going to take a look at that and see the parameters of that and how that went. That was quite unusual because the law enforcement people were trying to figure out what exactly this person was on. He was up, he was down, he was in, he was out of the car, and it just was quite unusual to see that.
Are you okay? Yeah. What's the matter with you?
Nothing. Oh, my arm. Oh, man.
Sir!
What?
Stop that. What are you doing?
Oh, man.
5:15. I said, get me an ambulance here. 10:18. I got something here. Sit.
Oh,
Jesus. Just stay right there. Don't move. Don't move.
I'm sorry.
I wish I could tell you, Sarge. I don't know. I need an ambulance 10:18. What were you taking
Sir,
tonight,
let me ask
sir?
you, while we finish watching this
Don't
man
bullshit
stumble
me.
in and out of his car, have you
What's
seen
wrong
something
with you?
similar to this?
Don't
We had a
Observed
GH
something like this?
A matter of fact, that's a great point. We had a GHB case on a traffic stop, and we charged him with DUI. Now, it's a while back. What's interesting, you're seeing some very interesting characteristics. And one of the things I like to point out is after he was stopped, arrested, you know, obviously there was no alcohol. It was GHB. The lab tested for it, came out positive result. He had no recollection of that actual traffic stop. He had amnesia. He didn't recall anything from the time that he was stopped, and his driving behavior was failing to drive within a single lane, and he was all over the road in our county.
And he also had an impairment, a physical impairment.
Most definitely. And when you're looking at mind-working relationship with the body, you know, we call it divided attention task psychophysical testing, and that mind could not process the actual task that we wanted him to do, which just walk a simple line or lift a foot off the ground for 30 seconds.
We've talked about just one of the classes of drugs that we're going to eventually get to, and that is depressants. But let me ask the three of you this question. How much information and knowledge would you say that people who are in your fields, what do they really know about these drug groups? 100%, 80%, 20%, 50%? What would be your opinions? Bruce, I'll start with you.
Oh, I'd say it's probably 10% or less in the law enforcement profession are well versed in recognition of drugs, recognition of paraphernalia, the physical or physical effects of each kind of drug. It's an area that we need to focus on around the country and become better at, because every day we're out there exposing ourselves as well as trying to protect those from themselves who are abusing these drugs. It's critical that we recognize the potential of what they might be abusing and how to get them to safety or protect them from hurting themselves or other people.
How can we get the word out, Terry?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Years ago, law enforcement would actually do a traffic stop and say something is funny about this. But fortunately, through society and looking at what the drug trends are nowadays, the training is there that now they know that they need to say, okay, it's funny. They list the characteristics because of court, and so they can try to get that testimony in and at least obtain the samples when they show a 000 reading on an intoxilizer test or some type of evidential breath test. So that's one facet of when you're looking at trying to get these folks to understand it. It's just like when you look at your narcotic vice detectives, etc. They can go out and buy the drugs all day long and see some things, but when you're looking at law enforcement officers on the DRE side, we're looking at effects, and what you sit there and you give us as evidence, which would be, you know, the dilated pupils or pinpointed pupils, whatever we may have, from, you know, the high blood pressure, and we look at pulse rates, we look at what the body tells us, because the body doesn't lie. And that's the one thing I always like to stress, that have confidence in what you observed. And these law enforcement officers around the country are learning more. And it is a very low percentage when it comes to people that are DREs. It's less than 1% of our total law enforcement population. But on the other side of it, law enforcement people are starting to train more and learn more. When you look at the classes of my colleagues and what they teach and what we teach, you know, they're saying, yes, now I could put together, when I went to that domestic call, that person may have been under the influence of some type of drug, and put that together. And we look at it from driving behavior too.
Rita, you're involved in the education portion of this. How do you reach out and grab their attention, to the people who need to know about this? What do you do?
Well, you have a lot of different audiences you need to approach. We need to approach law enforcement, we need to approach parents, we need to approach teachers. I have a very different perspective because I'm not really in law enforcement. We're support. We're really the geeks in the lab, so we know all the esoteric stuff, but we really, the more application stuff would be more, you know, in Terry and Bruce's realm. But getting the message out to parents and to teachers and to law enforcement, these are the drugs that are out there. A lot of places we train people aren't even aware of PCP. They're not aware of fentanyl. They're not aware of some of the trends that are really coming up. So getting that information out is very important.
Very good. All right, well, we are on a kind of a track meet here trying to get all of this information out. So we're going to move on now and talk about stimulants and things like cocaine and methamphetamine and crack. Terry, how can you identify users of this type of drug?
You know, that's an interesting category. Everything is speeding up the body when it comes to your stimulants. And what's interesting is when we do our DUI checkpoints in the county, and people can do those nationally, as you well know, the individuals that drive through the checkpoint, sometimes I feel like it's a drive-through for drugs, because they're coming in under the influence. We had an individual just last week, he actually had some cocaine on him and he actually stored it in his mouth, but you could see the characteristics, the dilated pupils, everything is hurried up. I mean, you got high blood pressure, high pulse rates, and then when they're talking to you, you can't get those folks to calm down, not one iota. And then other things too, when people are doing powder cocaine, obviously the runny nose, sometimes a bloody nose, you're going to see some of those characteristics. You're going to, you may even see some of the scratching of themselves too. You know, when you're looking at methamphetamine and they're looking at the crank bugs, you know, and they're thinking that there's things underneath their skin and they're always time scratching. But you're going to see a lot of different characteristics. But, you know, when Bruce was talking about Ritalin, it's really shocking to think that parents are taking their kids' Ritalin and crushing it up and using it for themselves, you know, and insufflating or snorting it or taking it. And there's different things that they're doing. So, you know, and you think of these people that are on these diet pills and they're trying to look at these things that try to hurry up their metabolism so they can help lose weight, but they don't think of what it can do to them when they're actually driving vehicles. You know, and we like to hit the schools too, the DITEP program, which is a drug impairment training for educational professionals, because these kids go to school and their parents and the teachers are trying to figure out what are they under the influence of, and you're seeing some of this stuff. Crack cocaine, I think that's going to be around a lot because it's inexpensive.
Bruce, what kind of things can signal that somebody is on cocaine? Terry talked about it at a traffic stop, and I'm sure you have some others to add to that.
Well, going back to a couple of comments both Terry and Rita have made, there was a mention of a water bottle for carrying GHB, and Terry has mentioned storing cocaine in the mouth. It has to be known that the paraphernalia industry, the traditional industry, is a $1 billion industry in our country. And that traditional paraphernalia are the bongs, the pipes, the bags, the containers that carry marijuana, the clips, the roach clips, and things of that nature. But paraphernalia has taken on a whole new dynamic with these emerging designer or different classes of drugs. There's a specialized container for just about every one of them, but a lot of abusers will place their drugs in what looks to be an innocent, acceptable type of container. They'll carry it in those devices, and they'll administer it through those devices. And so for an officer on a traffic stop or involved in an undercover operation, recognizing those, or a parent in a child's bedroom, or a teacher in a classroom looking at a child's backpack, it's critical that all of these folks recognize the telltale signs, the indicia, if you will, of participating in use of these drugs.
So the job of detecting abuse of this really just begins with a traffic pullover or the parent walks into the child's bedroom and that sort of thing, right?
Correct. There's signs that'll evolve over time, changes in behavior and so forth. And then looking, like you said, for the paraphernalia, looking for things that are out of place in context to where they're at, where people are going to hide drugs, where people are going to try to get drugs past a teacher, past a parent, etc.
Comment that I had heard about, we're talking about a drug diverter or drug diversion, and one of the things that I had heard was a person may spend more time devising a way to get high or to be influenced by a drug than they would spend working at a job or working to go to school.
I'd probably agree with that. I mean, getting drugs is somewhat simple. It's simpler than it should be. Obviously, we have too many people that abuse drugs and they can get them, but it takes some energy and it takes some thought and some strategy to get a hold of the drugs, to hide the drugs, to distribute the drugs. So I think that's probably a fair assessment.
Right. Normally you're spending about 8 hours on each one of these or close to this whole topic that we're dealing with. Anything else you would add to as we talk about stimulants?
The only other point I'd probably like to make is this is the class of drugs where you're going to have, with the possible exception of hallucinogens, you're going to have the highest abuse rates and the highest abuse rates of clandestine drugs. You know, as Bruce said, with the depressants, most of those are pharmaceutical preparations. People feel comfortable because a pharmaceutical company made them. There are pharmaceutical preparations that are stimulants. Ritalin is a stimulant. Amphetamine, methamphetamine, diet pills, phentermine, those are all stimulants. But usually we're talking about clandestine drugs where there is no quality control whatsoever, and the user really doesn't even know what they're getting for the most part. This is cocaine, methamphetamine, amphetamine. Those are your bigger abusers in this case.
Okay. Terry, Bruce? Something?
I'd add, you know, methamphetamine is still the other aspect of very spiraling upward drug abuse. The manufacturing of methamphetamine is rising in most states in the United States.
Well, we're hearing about it in the news more and more.
Yes, and it's kind of, it's like a cycle or a wave, if you will. When a new drug emerges in the country on one coast or the other or in the South, it ends up moving across the country in a wave fashion, and methamphetamine has done that and is continuing to do that. And I think we need to recognize the types of ingestion of all of these drugs we're talking about, because we're talking about pills, powders, liquids, and there are several manners that the young people will use to ingest these drugs. They'll take a pill, readily take a pill. They'll also crush that pill and snort or smoke it. They'll also insert that pill rectally, which is a growing trend with young people to get a more intense high from the drug itself. The powders can be laced. They can have all kinds of things swept up off a lab floor. A lot of dangerous chemicals are mixed in there. And then we have the organic drugs that we'll get to as well. But all of these drugs can be either snorted, smoked, inhaled, or inserted.
Wow. All right, what about party drugs? We're talking about hallucinogens and things like ecstasy and LSD. They're pretty popular with teens, are they not?
Yeah, they give...
and an older crowd, some of these?
Yeah, and they do because of the effect that they give. Very euphoric effects in an altered sense of time, sense of reality. Very dissociative type drugs, so that people lose inhibitions, which is...
What do you mean by that, dissociative drug?
The user's distance from the effects of what they're doing. So they're losing their inhibitions. They're more likely to go into a party and do things they wouldn't do, get in situations they wouldn't get into normally.
Leave their inhibitions at the door.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it's increasing our situations of younger teens getting in trouble with date rape situations, getting in trouble with sexually transmitted disease. We're starting to see an increase in that directly related with the increase of some of these drug uses.
What's the most well-known within this category?
Well, probably the most well-known for any generation is going to be LSD. However, the most used
and we're talking now, what, 5 decades or so, perhaps?
Yeah, at least back to the 50s and 60s, certainly. And the LSD that we see today, which is really actually rare. It's not a very common drug anymore. It's less than probably 5% of hallucinogens out there, but everybody knows about it. It has a track record. And it's not as strong as it used to be. People don't feel like they can fly anymore. The dosages are much less. But the drugs that are used in this class most commonly now is ecstasy class drugs. They're called phenethylamines, and they are the party drugs. They have stimulant and hallucinogenic effects, and they're very popular with the 15 to, say, 30-year-old crowd.
And that's also, you say ecstasy, that's MDMA, right?
That's MDMA, MDA, MDEA. There's actually more than 100 drugs in this class.
Is that right?
And the user usually doesn't know what they have, so they could get a drug that's actually fatal because the person that made it had no idea what they were making, thought they were making MDMA, but made PMA. And like Bruce said, people will take pills. Pills look safe. And the ecstasy drugs were marketed like Flintstone vitamins. They were pressed with, you know, Pikachu and Tinky Winky Teletubbies, and they were marketed and made to look benign, and kids started using them, and they became a huge problem.
Bruce, perhaps talk a little bit about the paraphernalia within this category.
Well, it's estimated that 1 in 8 of the teenagers in our country have tried methylene deoxymethamphetamine or ecstasy pills. Any container that will hold a pill is what is commonly used to transport them or keep them in a bedroom or keep them on the car seat.
So a contact case,
class.
Film canisters, things of
film
that
cans, but M&M containers, Skittle bags, Starburst packets, the little breath mint cans and canisters, the bubble gum little plastic hard tubes, any kind of container that will keep pills and keep them intact are used, and kids are pretty adept. They'll squeeze out an equal number of M&Ms and replace them with pills. They'll put some pills in with the M&M candies that are still in an M&M container or any kind of hard candy container as well.
What about Tootsie Rolls?
And Tootsie Rolls, soft candies like a Starburst or a Tootsie Roll. We've seen dealers of ecstasy push pills into those softer candies and sell those candies for $20 to $30 a piece. Kids will take the candy, and when the pill gets down to the candies dissolve, they'll swallow the pill, or they'll just squeeze it back out and swallow it. But looking at those kinds of innocuous packaging materials and understanding that they may contain illicit drugs, as well as every legitimate prescription bottle or aspirin bottle that may contain legitimately prescribed or other kinds of medicinal items have to be looked at much closer today by law enforcement and parents.
You have to be suspect about that.
You need to look close.
Right, and thinking of law enforcement, how does that affect you?
I tell you, it's
Makes
a
your job
challenge.
even larger, I'm sure.
And you know what? That's what we train. And if I can just digress one moment, what Rita was saying too. When I'm looking at what these folks are doing to manufacture these drugs, getting the ingredients off the internet, and then altering the ingredients hopefully to find like a better drug so they can sell it, market it. It's almost like a mini business for these kids, and the ingenuity is quite significant. So, you know, and I got to look at that because I look at how it causes the toxic waste, how it's even more of an officer safety problem when it comes to our law enforcement personnel actually going into a scene and having that exposure too, because you got to look at your own health. So these are things that we got to be very cognizant of. When I'm looking at these hallucinogens, Rita brought up some great points too, because you're looking at the synesthesia effect, that distortion of the senses. And that's what we're seeing when some of the kids, whether it be ecstasy or chewing angel trumpets or dealing with the Jimson weed, some of your natural hallucinogens, that's what's interesting because, you know, they'll sit there and look at something. I'll use an example in our county where a child was chewing angel trumpets in his school, and then when he's leaving his classroom, he put his desk on his back thinking it was his backpack. So that's what you're looking at, is a whole distortion of the senses, dialing a fake phone number that might be on and that's one of the things that I saw which was interesting. A girl sitting there trying to put a quarter in a jukebox that wasn't even there to sit there and play music. You know, and this is where your senses are so distorted because of the uniqueness of this drug category.
Wow. All right, well, we continue on, and into our next topic, we're going to talk about PCP. And according to the Drug Abuse Warning Network that tracks emergency room visits, PCP use is on the rise, is it not?
It is on the rise, but it's only on the rise in certain parts of the country. The West Coast and the Northeast, New York.
Why is that?
Well, I think Bruce kind of mentioned that when a drug starts and gets a lot of popularity, it's usually going to start in a couple of very highly populated places, and then it'll move across the country. PCP is another one of the synthetic drugs that are made in labs, so you need a lot of chemicals to make PCP, more so than, say, methamphetamine, which we could make here.
So when you say a lab, I think of this pharmaceutical lab that is very clean, that is very, you know, glass and so forth and so on, but...
No, nothing like that. This is somebody's bathroom, somebody's kitchen, a trailer, a shed out back, no quality control
in a remote
whatsoever.
area, perhaps?
Usually in a remote area because you have very strong chemicals with very strong odors, at least in the case of PCP, and you need a lot of those chemicals. So you do need a remote area to get away from a lot of population.
Wow.
But no, there is no quality control, there is no bacteria control, there is no making sure there's no contaminants, no lethal contaminants. So even though the drug itself is incredibly dangerous, you also have all the byproducts and all the contaminants that come from...
danger.
Exactly, from chemists who aren't chemists.
Wow. Terry, what are some of the things you've seen with this PCP?
Well, a couple things come to mind, and what Rita stated is I look at hotel rooms too. Right now, you could check in a hotel room that could have been lab for several different types of drugs, and you don't even know what your exposure level is going to be. But when I look at PCP, it's a dissociative anesthetic, and that's the uniqueness of this drug category too. And what that means is that, for instance, we've had to go out on calls, and you deal with somebody who's utterly aggressive. The mood swings are quite significant, and mind you, they have their threshold pain. You could sit there and break an arm, and they'll still wail at you thinking they still have their arm. Cut their hand off, and they'll still wail at you thinking that their hand's still attached, because that's what it does. It cuts off those nerve endings, and your brain's thinking, I still have it. So, you know, this is a dangerous drug category. People have to understand. They have such, you know, one thing about the body heat on this drug too, which, you know, we talk about people, and there are people making examples up north. They'll run around just bone naked out there on the streets, and they don't even think about it.
And not during the middle of the summer.
And this is in the winter. And I was doing some classes up in the Northeast, and they were saying, yes, now puts it all together. And that individual was just strung up on Ketalar, Ketacet, ketamine. And these
so
are...
the body temperature is up.
And this is what happens is it's just that they're thriving. And you know, when Bruce is talking about like people when it comes to hallucinogens, you know, they're sucking on little on suckers and blow pops and stuff like that, you know, because they're trying to salivate and get that thirst back. But on PCP, it's interesting when you see these people and they pretty much want to take their clothes off. And the violence, it's quite interesting to deal with those folks too.
Amazing. Well, one of the fastest growing drug groups is narcotics, and things like we're talking about heroin and many prescription drugs. Why are these so popular? Bruce, perhaps you would start this one off.
Well, once again, a lot of these are pharmaceutically manufactured and controlled, but we have a large problem with diversion, theft, legal script, doctor shopping. We have folks that have, in our state, managed to develop the ability to create false MRI records and then go to doctors and get prescriptions illegally.
So you would get multiple prescriptions from one doctor to another to another?
Yes, and we've actually arrested some doctors in our state for this kind of activity where they're selling prescriptions. But we also have people out there with ingenious mechanisms that they're coming up with to get prescriptions illegally. But you're talking about the OxyContin, the fentanyl, things of that, the chemical morphine drugs, if you will, the pharmaceutical morphines, Vicodin, which is the largest, most abused, hydrocodone, the single most abused type of drug of in this category in our country. They're touted as time release for pain regulation over a large period of time, but people find ways to get an instant high by crushing them and so forth, so they change the recipe. So then they look for other ways to ingest them to get a more intense high. But there are nobody's exempt from the potential abuse of these drugs.
Rita, from the scientist perspective, from the laboratory looking at this, what can you add to this topic as we talk about narcotics?
The 2000 to 2010 is a decade of pain management. The Medical Association has dedicated themselves to helping people who are in chronic pain. And that's obviously a very good thing. The side effect of that is pharmaceutical companies are putting out opiates, which is what we call these drugs, opiates and opioids, in record numbers. And they're being prescribed in record numbers, and they're being diverted in record numbers.
Why is that?
Because they're available, and just like the tranquilizers, because they're perceived to be safe. You know, they're made by legitimate pharmaceutical companies. They are prescribed by doctors. They're not going to kill me because it's a safe drug. It's available. And the effects of them, they reduce pain, they induce sleep, and they give a feeling of intoxication and lethargy, very good, you know, warm and fuzzy feelings, and it's very easy to become addicted to them.
So there are similarities. Are there variations between the different ones you've mentioned, the opium, morphine, codeine, etc.?
Some are stronger than the others. You can separate them into two different classes based on whether they're derived from opium or whether they're synthetic. Lately we've seen a large increase in some synthetic drug abuse, especially fentanyl. Fentanyl is a very strong narcotic, synthetic narcotic, that's usually sold in patch form. And a 3-day supply is placed transdermally on the skin and is slowly diffused.
So it's not ingested, it is on the skin.
Right. But then now we have abusers that take that, cut it open, and ingest that gel. So they're getting 3 days worth of the equivalent of almost heroin
in one
shot. And we're getting a lot of overdoses, especially in the high school age kids.
Yeah, I'd like to add, we have a fentanyl problem emerging around the country as well when the pharmaceutical industry created what in essence is a grape-flavored blow pop or lollipop that has the drug in it for people to regulate pain. So we're seeing interesting for legal use, but it has become an abused item and is a rapidly growing abused item in the northeast part of the country, as well as we're seeing it down here as well.
Oh my. Terry, have you seen this?
Unfortunately, yes. And I have to say one of my earliest drug-impaired driving cases was in the morning around 10 o'clock. And again, you're looking at people like Rita was saying and Bruce, very lethargic. I mean, you're looking at droopy eyelids, for instance, and you can see them pass out at your traffic control devices, your stoplights, stop signs. So when you're sitting there dealing with a narcotic analgesic user, they have a raspy speech. Everything is, we call it down, down, down. The blood pressure's down, pulse rate's down, body temperature down. Everything is just down. And when we're sitting there looking at it, We even had a deputy who made a traffic stop of one individual under the influence of a narcotic analgesic, and a syringe was still in the arm, and it was still tied, and they're just driving around, and obviously driving behavior was horrific when he made the stop. And, you know, you got these folks driving around in our county, and I'm sure around the country, but it's very significant. One thing I have to say that makes this drug kind of unique, too, when we do the drug evaluation, their eyes, when they have a pinpoint pupil, I call them snake eyes, and it's so distinguishable when we do this, when we do the testing. So, you know, the eyes don't lie, and that's like the windows to the soul, you know, and that's one of the comments we make when we do our evaluations. So, you know, Rita made a good comment, because in our county, it's significant. Painkillers are significant. And people like to take it, and they say, well, I'll feel better, drive better, I'm more relaxed. But when you're looking at it from a perspective of being a driver, you're looking at these people, they're like, well, if I hit somebody, who cares? As long as I feel better, because, you know, I'm taking this fentanyl patch, and kids are doing that. And like she's saying, the transdermal absorption, you got people doing the suppositories. We're getting a lot of different things. Pills are just a bonus. But people are finding innovative ways to take the drug, steal the drug, you know, and I'm sure, Bruce, anybody will tell you, and law enforcement out there, that's the reason why we really had to be very cognizant when we were dealing with responding to our alarm calls at these veterinary clinics or hospitals, etc., you know, and take that affirmative officer safety approach, but also see what these folks are actually doing.
It's kind of interesting to see heroin within this group. What are your thoughts regarding that?
Well, heroin, we do have that in our county, you know, and I don't think it'll ever go away.
Why is that?
You know, it's been I consider it a popular drug. And, you know, and now I think the popularity, it goes on a pendulum. I think you probably would agree. You know, I remember back in the 70s and 60s, and then, you know, it lost its popularity. Now it's coming back again, too. And some people are, whether it be former users that they want to say, or it's just a new drug of choice, heroin is there, you know, and you're looking at, you know, some of the morphine products and byproducts, etc. People nowadays, I hate to say it, it seems like they don't want to deal with realities, and they find their escape mechanisms by going to a heavy, whether depressant or a narcotic analgesic.
Trying to mask the problems.
Well, you know, one of the things that we've seen as a phenomenon over the last several years, when heroin was a big drug in popularity back when Terry said in the 60s and the 70s, it was a single drug taken and primarily injected, primarily put on top of maybe some marijuana. The polydrug, or the cocktailing of drug phenomenon, has emerged over the last number of years, and heroin was actually marketed by the heroin traffickers in our state. They went into the designer, the rave clubs, or the clubs where ecstasy and other kinds of amphetamine drugs were popular, and they gave it away. They gave heroin to the ecstasy users to tout its ability to create a euphoria on top of the amphetamine-induced higher metabolism that young people were experiencing. So it made them wide awake but numb, if you will.
But also to create an addiction to it.
Yes. Heroin is almost addictive the first time you use it. And every one of these drugs affects people that take it differently. We know what side effects are common when we see them, but the metabolism of each individual is unique. So snorting some heroin, which is one of the things they marketed it, it's more potent today, so you don't need to inject it. You can snort it. And so people would snort heroin on top of some ecstasy, and they would believe that that was a safer, better way to take it and not experience the addictive or the injection negative connotation.
You've used a term that I don't think I've heard used within drug abuse, and that is the marketing of this, that they were actually out marketing, selling, trying to promote the use of a drug.
Absolutely. And we see, and when I go out and train law enforcement or other parent groups or professionals, that's exactly what we're dealing with on the government side of things. We see the first rave club in Florida, they gave LSD away at the door with your cover charge. The heroin dealers came in and gave it away for a few weeks to get people to try it on top of ecstasy. Even though a lot of drug abuse is peer-to-peer or friend-to-friend or associate-to-associate, we do see these drug trafficking organizations trying to always increase their market, and they're finding ways to advertise, tout. The internet is full of it. but they're always looking to expand their market, just like any product manufacturer is.
Very amazing. Well, let's move on now to probably the most abused drug that we've heard about, and that is marijuana. And it's also, as we've learned today, considered an hallucinogen. It's the most widely abused drug in the U.S., is that right?
That is correct.
Tell me a little bit about it, Rita.
Marijuana is easy to grow. You can pretty much get it very easily. It's cheap.
Around the country, it can
around
be grown
the country. You can
indoors.
grow it in your kitchen.
Yeah, okay.
We've grown it in the lab. We have a license to do that, so that's okay. But
Okay.
yes, marijuana, it's very easy to get a hold of. It's perceived as being not dangerous. I mean, there's been a lot of efforts to make it legal. That it's, people saying it's no different than alcohol. Why can't it be legalized? And it hasn't been, fortunately. But I said it's easy to get. It's perceived to be safe, and it's cheap.
You say it's perceived to be safe,
Yes.
but I think there's another side to that.
Well, alcohol is perceived to be safe, but alcohol is not safe. I mean, used properly, I guess is the term I want to say. It can be used, and you can use it in a manner that's not going to cause harm to yourself or others. But marijuana, it has the side effects. It's a hallucinogen. It's an intoxicant.
What will it do?
It's very similar to alcohol in some manners, that you get the very lethargic feeling of well-being type of effects. But it does have hallucinogenic effects, so it's somewhat dissociative, where you feel a little bit removed from the situation. It's the classic stoned type characteristics.
Okay. Is it something you have to increase use to maintain a certain high level?
It's something you develop a tolerance for, and you will need more over time, but not so much as the narcotics.
Terry, what are some of the indicators of abuse of marijuana?
Well, here we go. At our DUI checkpoints, they're driving through and they're still smoking their cannabis. So
Still hot as they pull through.
And I remember dealing with one individual, and he says, well, I didn't think I smoked enough to get stopped, and he ended up going to jail for the DUI as well. And people really don't take cannabis seriously. When you're looking at the effects versus smoking just regular cigarettes, it's what, 50 to 70% harsher when it comes to the toxins in it. Another thing when you're looking at is the paranoia you're dealing with people too on the road. You're looking at very dilated pupils, and then when I'm dealing, and I know I'm skipping around when I'm looking at the individual characteristics, but relax inhibitions, hey, it's okay, they don't worry about too much. But some of the key indicators when I look at the redness of the conjunctivi in the eyes, and when I look at the aromas, it's so distinguishable from some of your other drugs too. And they're like, I figure if I spray my can of music, I had people burning incense in the cars trying to do the cover-up aromas, but you still have that fragrance and of that cannabis in that car. We don't really see too much of the hashish or the hashish oil. I don't ever recall seeing anything like that in our county. Usually people are just smoking and enjoying themselves while they're driving, and then getting into car crashes or being stopped because they're like, well, this stoplight's here, maybe I'll stop, maybe I won't. And that's just the type of, laissez-faire type of attitude they have when it comes to their driving behavior. And that's a very big concern for us when you're looking at a child crossing the street.
Sure. Bruce, what is some of the paraphernalia that law enforcement should be aware of, parents should be aware of as well?
It's kind of the classic drug, and the paraphernalia associated with it has not really changed because the product is pretty much as it was, other than the potency going up over the last number of years and it becoming a much more potent drug. And I think the point can be made that there are a lot of people who will consume a glass of wine or a beer or a cocktail with dinner, but nobody smokes marijuana without the intent of getting stoned.
Sure.
So everybody that partakes in that drug is going to have some kind of metabolic effect, some kind of physical reaction, and it's going to change them. They carry the drug in any manner. They can put an organic material in, a lot of the same containers, something that looks innocent. The plastic baggie is still out there, but anything that'll hold small quantities. One of the bigger trends with marijuana we're seeing is lacing a marijuana cigarette with any one of these other drugs to get a more potent high. So
that's why it's become more potent by doing the
well, the
cocktail with
THC value of marijuana has spiraled up over the last decade as well. So it's a lot more potent, kind of like the heroin is. It's a better recipe. A lot of these folks are growing it indoors hydroponically, which they can control the atmosphere and increase the THC content. but they'll still lace it with some other drug to get a multiple effect or a multiplier effect, which goes back to that cocktailing or bumping is what the trade calls it when you mix these drugs together.
I was told by doing another program that one of the officers had indicated that what you were actually smoking is the plant's own self-defense system, its own internal weed killer, and that is what is giving you the high. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I've never heard it presented quite that way, but Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol is the psychoactive drug in that. And as Bruce said, the level is increasing not because a chemist is making it stronger, but because really botany, from what you remember from your science classes in college, you can make a stronger strain. You can make a stronger plant which has different characteristics. So they're actually breeding the plant, for lack of a better word, to have more of the psychoactive ingredients.
So they're very knowledgeable about what they are doing.
I think they're knowledgeable in very specific arenas, but if you go to the internet, you could easily find many ways to increase the THC level of your homegrown marijuana. So the information is just more readily available.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our last class, our last group of drugs that we're going to be talking about, and that is inhalants. And are kids still sniffing glue? Are they still inhaling things like that?
Yes. Inhalants we still consider them gateway drugs. If a junior high, the beginning, something that's going to introduce kids into the next level. But we're seeing actually an increase in some strange inhalant abuse. Nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas, which your dentist will give you if you have high anxiety before they do the root canal. We're seeing a lot of diversion of that. And in fact, in Florida, they've made it a felony to possess it outside of its legal
purpose.
uses, yes. Also, solvents have become very common. We've had several deaths in this county over the last couple of years of young people inhaling paint thinners, spray paints, especially metallic spray paints. The chemicals in these actually give intoxicating effects, and very similar to narcotics in some cases. And these things kill brain cells forever. So kids are using these volatile solvents are actually going to have long-term effects from this. It is completely irreversible.
So once they start, they've begun to kill their brain.
Exactly.
And it continues on and on.
Exactly.
Have you come upon this? Is this something that you teach and talk about while in law enforcement circles?
It happens a lot, unfortunately. And people like to try to disguise their inhalant use too. And Rita has an excellent point. It starts out as kids, and it's socially acceptable because if I'm inhaling, gas fumes or whatever, it's just a euphobic type of high. Now, my thing is, we have stopped drivers that discontinue anything that will drink a beer and inhale like paint, for instance, and it's not the paint itself, you're looking at the fumes of it, etc. Gold and silver are our most popular colors, but when you stop them, it's a little bit of a hint when they say, why are you stopping me, and they got a gold face. That's a hint. So, and then you see the paraphernalia, as Bruce will talk about, and I'm sure he has. When you got the paint cans in the back, this nitrous oxide too, when kids are starting to use it, they'll have that hooked up and they're inhaling while they're driving down the street. So go into businesses, industry too, to try to tap in. And inhalants to me is insurmountable. The anesthetic gases too that she spoke about. And you're looking at really intense headaches. You're looking at noticeable bloodshot, watery eyes too. Very laid back. We were doing a drug evaluation on a subject, a matter of fact, who was doing inhalants of a solvent material. I mean, you could smell it throughout the entire facility. And the characteristics were quite evident. So, you may have plasticity in the skin, and, we do some eye testing too, obviously, but these individuals too, kind of laid back, and it's just purely the enjoyment of the substance itself.
Why is it I've gone into the grocery store and I've tried to buy, whipping cream, and I get home and I cannot get anything out of the can? What's going on with that, Bruce?
Well, I don't know why your can didn't work. Mine,
but you have an idea why that is.
But there is a little, that nitrous oxide is a legal product. It will remain legal because it is used in gourmet food preparation. Mm-hmm. You can order it over the internet, and it comes in these small little metal tubes called a whippet on the street, and there are charging devices, so a balloon can be filled with the nitrous oxide from one of those small whippets. The tanks that you can get from the helium, oxygen, carbon dioxide type yards have been rigged with 2-liter Coke bottles and hoses to inhale the nitrous oxide off of those. We see solvents put in plastic bags and carried in vehicles, and people walk around in a crowd at a concert or some other type of venue with a plastic bag balled up in their hand, and they simply raise the bag to their face. Cans, Coke cans, any kind of innocent-looking bottle, they can squeeze the material into a paper towel or into the can itself and walk around and look like they're carrying an innocent container and simply raise it, and instead of drinking, they're really inhaling through the opening of the device. But these things are volatile, and they are so easily found in every home, so a lot of young people can find out about them and get access to them even if the medicine cabinet's out of reach.
Where does a young child get this idea? How do they get this urge to want to abuse an inhalant or even think about it? Where do they see it?
They're going to get it from their peers, especially if they have older siblings. They're going to get it from television. They're going to get it. I mean, our culture, our television culture, is very much geared towards a lot of alternative activities, and our young kids are watching. Our 9, 10-year-olds are watching CSI. They're watching Law and Order, and they're learning about this stuff. But a lot of it's still peers.
The best drug education is available by people who are in the drug industry on their websites, and a lot of young people find out about these websites. Most parents don't even know they exist. A lot of law enforcement people still do not know they exist, but kids find out about it from their peers, from their classmates at school. They're not always under your watchful eye, and they're finding access to information that you're just not able to close the faucet from.
Distorted information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's readily available, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you seeing this as well, Terry?
You know, it's really sad, and I know Bruce talks about it, and I look at the ecstasy, and I keep thinking of a saying that kids are looking at drugs as peace, love, unity, and respect, and that's all their life is geared towards. So their escape mechanisms is finding types of drugs that help them fulfill that prophecy or that goal in their own life, and it really breaks your heart when I keep thinking of what we're wasting in the ingenuity of our children, of our peers in the workplace, to try to channel that energy into something positive and something that would be a benefit in the community. So, you know, that's the sad part, I'll say, that when you're looking at the inhalants, I think sometimes they just fall in it accidentally. They inhale something, they say, oh, that smells good, and then continually do it, and then the addiction goes up, and then here you go. And like Rita was saying, it's a gateway drug, and then of course if I like it, I want to share it with my friends, and then it just mushrooms into, you know, problems that are that's going to, I hate to say, stun their growth, and it's a shame to even think about that.
Is it a prevalent problem, inhalants?
Yes. A lot of deaths associated with it. Interestingly, Freon from your air conditioning. You have a lot of problems in the neighborhood where people's air conditioning is suddenly not working, and the air conditioning repairman comes in and somebody's cut a line. It's very common for, especially in commercial areas, for kids to cut the line and go in and get high off of that Freon. So yeah, we see spikes in it where it goes up and down quite a bit, but there's definitely a constant level of it, especially with the whippets, with the nitrous oxide, and with the gasoline and the spray paints and that type of thing. It's a quick, easy high.
Can I, and if I could piggyback on one thing about Rita said and Bruce, this is a unique category for law enforcement to try to prove a case. You know, we have to really look at the symptomology of the person and take in the paraphernalia to help substantiate a case, because a lot of this stuff will not show up and, you know, if you take a urine test from somebody or a blood test. So we really have to rely on your keen observations, and as well as any type of evidence, and take pictures of it, use your digital cameras, something to help substantiate if you're doing a traffic stop or you get involved with this.
So that you have that solid information.
Exactly.
Well, we have just about wound down the hour, but we're not quite finished, so I would like to take the moment here to have each of you kind of make a wrap-up, a summation of your thoughts about this topic. It is very important. What would you want to drive home? We may have, we're calling this Drug Recognition 101, but it very well may be that it is, in addition to being a foundation builder, it might be somebody who is a seasoned professional out there who is watching and could very well be a reminder to you of things or bring about some things you don't know. So what would you like to add into this? Bruce, let's start with you.
Well, the first point I would make is we've spent an hour just touching highlights. We could spend this entire hour on any one of these drugs, any one of the trends associated with it, any one of the symptomologies that associated with a particular drug, the paraphernalia, the trafficking of that drug, the transactions. I mean, there's a lot of law enforcement aspects to it, and we've tended to focus on the mentioning of a lot of young people. This year we have a publication in our state, the Florida Bar Journal, which is the journal that most lawyers in our state that are certified to practice as a member of the Florida Bar. It ran a third of a page ad touting clients of a company could come to their clinic on Thursday, get detoxified, and be back at their practice on Monday. And they touted the fact that their clients include lawyers, accountants, doctors, and other types of professionals. This is not a young person problem. This is a societal-wide problem that we've talked about today. The abuse of the drugs that we've just touched on reaches every corner and every profession and every aspect of our communities. And it's critical for law enforcement to stay safe by understanding that it could involve their contact with any individual, and they need to become aware of these drugs and how to recognize them.
Very good. Thank you. Rita, I'm sorry. Let me go back to Terry.
That's okay. My only thing for law enforcement is don't take your observations for granted. What you see, work upon them, find your networks in your community, use your resources in the community. I'm quite blessed. I mean, to look at Rita and the expertise in her office, that we have a question we can call. You know, we have people that don't take like Walgreens or any other type of stores like that. If they have the pharmacists out there, ask the questions. Use them as resources. We found they're a valuable commodity. And that's the thing. More information only helps substantiate your case. And officer safety is the utmost because you don't know what you're dealing with these individuals.
Very good. Rita?
I think the only point I'd like to, we've talked about different classes of drugs.
Right.
We've kind of touched on the fact a couple times that there's a lot of, most drug abusers, serious drug abusers, do not take one class of drugs. And they do not take one class of drugs at one time. They take a stimulant, they take a depressant, they come off the stimulant. They take a hallucinogen, they piggyback that with other hallucinogens and inhalants and so forth. Drug abuse in this country is an economic problem. You know, we see the commercials that, you know, drugs fund terrorism, and that's really true. We're going to see an increase in drugs in different areas because they're being marketed to us, and they're going to spread across the country like that.
Thank you, three. We really appreciate it. And we have covered lots of material today, and chances are you might have a few questions. So here's how you can get a hold of our guests today. Their emails, addresses are up on the screen. Please take time to write that down, and if you have questions, you can contact each and every one. Bruce Ashley, Lieutenant Terry DeCino, and Rita Newman. Also want to remind you the Multi-Jurisdictional Counter-Drug Task Force Training Program offers an 8-hour course about current drug trends. You can find out about it in the MCTFT website at www.mctft.com. That's all the time we have for today. Be sure to check out the MCTFT website for the list of upcoming broadcasts. Thank you.
You've been watching a telecast brought to you by the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in partnership with the Multi-Jurisdictional Counter-Drug Task Force Training Program at St. Petersburg College. For more information about this or other FLETC and MCTFT programs, visit www.mctft.com.